I just saw the new Lion King, and okay, let's just establish from the jump that the Lion King 1994 set an impossible bar. The fact that Disney felt the need to redo it as a live action film, quote unquote, along with all the other live action remakes they've done over the past decade or so, really says nothing about the original film's non-existent shortcomings and says a whole lot more about Disney's own hubris and greed. So for me, the overwhelming takeaway is that next time I'll probably just watch the original or read Hamlet. I watched 0 trailers prior to going into this movie. I like to go in clean, as I like to say, whenever I'm going to see a new movie, at least as much as I possibly can. And now that I'm no longer a professional movie douche, that's a lot easier to do. I also read approximately 0 articles during pre-production and production of this film, but a lot of the headlines about the major casting announcements, I was privy to those because, one, a lot of those announcements came out whilst I was still in my movie douchery full time. Fact is, much as you do your best to avoid certain stories and not read up on certain things, information that you never sought out still finds ways to seep its way into your life. I mean, the Kardashians have built an entire empire off of this very phenomenon. I digress. I was originally on the train of seeing no value in a Lion King remake, but when I heard the word Beyonce, I said, I'll allow it. Regarding the 2 singles, I guess you can say, from the film, Spirit to me is meh. For me, it feels almost too derivative, too on brand to the soundscape of the original film. It didn't feel fresh or new to me. Bigger is better. Bigger does really feel fresh to me. It sounds a lot more inspirational. And I felt that that song was much more on brand for Beyonce while still merging it with the sound aesthetic and styling of The Lion King. Anyway, this is a movie review, I guess, not a music one, so let's get back to the matter at hand. After learning of Beyonce being cast as Nala, my greatest fear for this film was Beyonce's speaking voice. In the original animated film, and this one is also animated, but that's another story for another day. I don't know why they're calling this live action, but I'm sure there's been plenty of internet chatter about that already. As I was saying, in the original animated film, a lot of characters had 2 people playing them, doing the performance. One for the speaking portions and one for the singing portions. And that is a practice that, in my opinion, should have been maintained. Beyonce's strength is not acting, and before the beehive comes for me, I am a massive Beyonce fan, and I have the receipts. As a matter of fact, while it looks like I'm dressed properly right now and put together, I'm actually wearing Ivy Park sweatpants, so there's that. However, I'm not so blind with love and admiration for Beyonce that I see her as completely infallible. That would really indicate a loss of any grip whatsoever on reality. So when it comes to Beyonce or anything else for that matter, I can say, okay, girl. And I can also say, okay, girl. We can do both things. Ultimately, her not great acting abilities and the fact that her voice is so recognizable, her speaking voice itself is extremely recognizable. It's impossible to separate that you're hearing Beyonce talking as this lion, complete with her touch of country accent, unless you are a 7-year-old who isn't Blue Ivy. Like, you're going to notice, oh, that's Beyonce. Perhaps that was the point. Perhaps the filmmakers thought that that would be a good thing, but as an audience member, as a viewer, I don't think that it is. I mean, I damn near expected to hear Nala say, everybody say, hey, Miss Nala, in the middle of the 3rd act. So in my opinion, the filmmakers should have proceeded with having her do the singing performance as Nala, as well as doing the Gift album, but she should not have been asked to do the speaking portions of Nala's vocal performance. And I would say the opposite is true for Seth Rogen as Pumbaa. He was a passable Pumbaa, #passable Pumbaa, and he did get a chuckle or 2 out of me for his performance. But when it came to singing, he was by far the weak link. It honestly sounds like he knew that and didn't really try. And while we're on the subject, let's talk about Don Glover, who plays adult Simba. No tea, no shade, girl, but mediocre on all fronts. Both his spoken and sung performances were utterly forgettable. I mean, what a wasted opportunity. I sincerely believe that Donald Glover is one of the most talented men in show business right now. And I don't mean one of the most talented black men, just one of the most talented men in show business. But Don Don, this ain't it. I guess at the time that they were casting this, Disney was just looking to cast a name. And at the time they were casting this film, Donald Glover was the name. That was back circa Atlanta season 1, and Redbone was being played pretty much on repeat anywhere you went. So I can understand their decision in that moment, but in retrospect, in hindsight, to me it was the wrong choice and very short-sighted in retrospect. They could have done better. The need to cast bankable stars is perhaps the downfall of every mainstream release, and The Lion King is no exception. John Oliver was John Oliver. Initially, I thought that that was great casting because John Oliver legit looks like Zazu, but he, like Beyonce, was a bit of a distraction. His voice was just what we're used to hearing on Last Week Tonight, and as such, he did still give quite a few funny line readings, but he's John Oliver. It's legit his only job to do so. The shocker for me was just how great Billy Eichner was. Billy Eichner as Timon was a real scene stealer for me. Historically, I'm not a huge fan of Billy Eichner. I just can't take all the yelling. And similar to Beyonce, Seth Rogen, and so on, my fear was that his own brand, his unique voice, his own cult of personality would distract from the character. And he absolutely didn't. While I don't think he's better than Ernie Sabella, who voiced Timon in the original film, because you can't be better than flawless, but I do think that Billy Eichner came the closest to matching the caliber of the original performance in this remake, except for one other performance, and that is Scar, played by Chiwetel Ejiofor. I was super young when the first Lion King came out, so the fact that Jeremy Irons was the voice of the original Scar didn't mean much to me until I got older and learned who Jeremy Irons was as I started blossoming into being the movie douche that I am today as a tween and teen. But to me, Ejiofor, aside from Billy Eichner, is the only person who managed to match the quality of the performance of the original film whilst still also making it his own. What made me happiest more than anything was hearing James Earl Jones as the voice of Mufasa again. Honestly, even before I actually saw the film, just thinking about James Earl Jones returning to play Mufasa, it makes me want to cry, and I'm not sure why. Perhaps it's just that The Lion King 1994 is so strongly cleaved to my youth that there's something almost Proustian about hearing Mufasa's voice now that I'm a grown-ass woman about my business. Whatever it is that makes me get a little verklempt, what we're not going to do is have me crying on YouTube, so let's just move on. Jumping back to Beyonce, I think the best career move Beyonce ever made was getting out of acting roles, and this film was a reminder of that. Abandoning acting was a watershed moment in her career, which, even though it was never formally announced, it became pretty abundantly clear in hindsight. Remember Foxy Cleopatra? The MTV hip opera Carmen? I'm sure she'd rather that we didn't. However, the Beyonce as we know her right now might not exist in the same way if she hadn't basically quit acting after Dreamgirls. And it was the right choice for her. We can't all thrive and excel in every single thing we do. And normally, if I say something like that, I usually follow it up with, unless you're Beyonce. Frankly, the fact that she is not great at acting helps keep me from jumping out of a window. Just give me one thing that she is objectively less than good at, okay? I need to live another day. And let's be perfectly candid, Beyonce is already playing a role, and that role is Beyonce. Her image and everything about her is so heavily curated, she probably can't muster the energy to play a role on top of a role. Just being Beyonce as she allows us to experience her and see her and, I guess, consume her in a way, because that is what we do as the public, that's exhausting enough. I imagine taking this role as Nala was just Beyonce further positioning herself to be our queen once the revolution commences. At this point, her plan 100% lacks subtlety, but I remain her humble servant. I want to touch on something really quickly, which I know is going to have a lot of people getting into the whole black women are never satisfied, nothing is ever good enough for y'all are never happy. Which, sidebar, try living as a black woman for one day and tell me if you feel that we lack the grounds to say that we feel relentlessly disrespected. Anyway, the point I just want to make briefly about Nala, light-skinned lion with green eyes. They even have colorism in the wild, I guess. And yes, I know that is how Nala was drawn in the first film, which frankly only fosters my argument rather than damages it. Fairer skin remains the ideal 25 years later, even when we're talking about CG lions. Again, I know a lot of people are going to say that I'm pointing at something that isn't there. The problem is, yes, it is. Moving on, what I don't take any issue with whatsoever is the actual animation in this live action film. Disney will undoubtedly clean up at the Oscars for their work on this. The details and the sheer amount of work put into this film's animation are beyond reproach, which frankly is to be expected when it comes to animation drawn by hand in the past and rendered by robots in the now. Disney doesn't set the standard, Disney is the standard. And I think The Lion King 1994 was the first, or at least one of the first films to use computer-generated images in hand-drawn animation, using them together. So The Lion King 1994 was already a huge turning point in giving us the animation and animation films as we know them today. It was a sad day for me. I just find that computer animation feels too cold and soulless for me. I just will always find that drawn animation resonates better for me. I don't know what it is. Maybe I'm just an old soul. Actually, I know I'm an old soul. In any event, it is cool to see the sort of circle of technology, so to speak, where the primary sequence where I know computers and computer animation was used a lot was the Antelope Stampede in the 1994 film. And it's cool to see how technology has evolved over the past couple of decades to where we are now, to see computers giving us the entirety of this film. Overall, I don't think this is a bad movie. I think it was fair to pretty good. The problem is the original film is great. And I feel that I can say that objectively and not just as a salty aging millennial. The new version lacks the whimsy, the whimsical fun tone that was achieved so successfully in the Disney films of yesteryear. I think that's due in no small part to the fact that this film is caught in the uncanny valley of appearing real without being realistic. I don't think you can play both sides of the fence and have it be effective in a project like this. And that led to choices being made that more or less eliminated some of the most fun, iconic, and outlandish moments that appear in the first Lion King. I'm sure pretty much everyone in the world has seen the original Lion King, but for example, Rafiki's samurai moment during the big showdown at the end, the way it's done here, it's nowhere near as good. And sacrificing the levity from moments like that in the first film to make this new, more real one, this live action one, they sacrificed what made The Lion King so special in the first place. Anything that was kept was at best a watered down, sterilized version of things we remember from the first film, but done in a way where they couldn't go for it and have the same strong choices, the same gusto they would have had in a traditional drawn cartoon, I guess. Indeed, by incorrectly branding this flick live action, they shot themselves in the paw. I'm sorry. No, I'm not sorry. I regret nothing. In the end, we're left with a rather dry, sterilized version of this film, which really had me missing the character, the seasoning, the flavor from the first film. I imagine it's a bit like seeing the Pantages version of your favorite play when you've already seen the real thing on Broadway. Still pretty good, still solid, but nowhere near as good as the Broadway version. And when you compare the two, it really pales in comparison. And ultimately, I think it's impossible to view a film like this through the lens of letting it stand on its own, because even Disney is constantly referencing the original. So I don't think it's realistic to expect people to take this at face value and not view it as something to be compared to the original film. I don't think that's a realistic expectation. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the new Disney Lion King film. If you were curious about it, I don't think you'll hate it, but I also don't think it's going to have the same rewatch value of the original, not just for us millennial types or the people who remember the first one and seeing it when it came out, but even for the younger generations. I honestly think that the original one is probably going to resonate better with kids than this new one. I don't give a shit about that. I don't like kids. So anyway, that is going to do it for me today. I am going to be filming another movie review right after this because no one's going to watch it anyway, so I may as well be time efficient and bang it out. That's going to be for The Last Black Man in San Francisco. So if possible, I will be putting up both reviews today, do a little bit of a double feature movie review because I've been meaning to film this review for like a week. So if you are curious in that film, That review will be linked here if it is up, and if not, no hard feelings. I sincerely think about 8 people are going to watch that video. That's it for this one. Thank you so much for hanging out with me while I talked all things Lion King and even did my corny Lion King color palette inspired. It's not the Lion King palette, but the colors that I use were very much inspired by the Lion King on my eye makeup today. Most of y'all know that I am corny like that. So that's gonna do it. I will see you guys in the next video, and always remember, never trust anyone with a Morphe code. Bye bye.
That's a nappy-headed hose there, I'm gonna tell you that now.